Hey crew, and welcome back. Today I want to show you how to set up your character have both first and third person view. So your first person character has full body awareness and you have the smooth camera transition to go to third person. And when you transition, we'll ensure that your character is always oriented to the correct direction. Let's get started. For this project, I'll be starting with the third person template set up for Blueprints desktop. I do not have the starter content enabled as we won't need it for this project. I did name it FP TP camera setup. And we'll just wait for this to load. First thing we want to do is go in and make a copy of our character. So I'm going to go into the third person folder, Blueprints. I'm going to highlight this, hit Control D, and I'm going to name this FPTP character. That way the original character is preserved. To get your game to load your character, you're going to want to open this third person game mode. And under default pawn class, we're going to hit this drop down and choose the character we just created. Compile and save and go ahead and close that. So back in the content drawer, I'm going to open the character we just created. Stock that to our main window. So we're going to go over to viewport and a couple things I want to change. For the camera that's already in the scene, I'm going to hit F2 and rename this to TP for third person camera. And then this is personal preference. So I'm going to come up to camera boom and I'm going to change some of these positions. I'm going to set this to 10 so the camera is off the shoulder just a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and raise this up. The value of 53 is pretty good. Compile and save. So if we come and play our game, you'll see that the camera just sits just a little higher than what it normally does. Then we're going to click on mesh. I'm going to click add. We're going to add another spring arm to this. I'll just leave that name spring arm. And then with spring arm highlighted, I'm going to add a camera. I'm going to name this FP camera for first person. If you scroll your camera out a little bit, you'll notice your spring arm is started in this orientation. First thing we want to do is with the spring arm highlighted, we're going to come over on the right side and look for parent socket. I'm going to hit this folder icon next to it. I'm going to scroll down until we find head. And this is going to socket the camera to the head bone of your skeletal mesh. I'm going to take the target arm length and I want this to be 0. And then on the rotation for the X, do -90. And for the Z, I want to do 90. And then on the location, found a value of about 12.9 works pretty well. So let's go ahead and zoom in and take a look, see where this character is. So for the Manny and Quinn meshes, since they are pretty much just the one mesh, this will work out pretty well. If you have a different character that you've downloaded from the marketplace or Fab, and they have separate materials for eyes and teeth and that sort of thing, you may have to use a transparent material to hide those once we start using this camera. Compile and save. Now I'm going to go over to the event graph. So this is the standard event graph that comes with the third person character. Personal preference, I'm going to rename this comment to start play. Add that on there. We'll come back to this in a moment. One of the things we're going to need to do is track if we are in first person or not. Let's create a Boolean named is first person. Let's create two functions. First one, we're going to name F for function, FP, camera active. And I want to create a second one. I'm going to name it FTP for third person, camera active. So let's go back to our first person camera active. With the third person character in the way it's set right now, if we go in and play our game, we'll notice we can spin the camera around without changing the orientation of the character. Obviously this won't work for us in first person view. So I'm going to back out of that, and in our first person camera active, first thing we're going to want to do, use controller rotation yaw. We're going to set that to true. This way our moving the camera will orient the player. Then we want to pull out a reference to our third-person camera. We want to set active. We'll hook up the execution pin and we will not check new active on that. We will get our first-person camera and do the same thing here, set active. And then we do want to set that to true, so we turn that camera on. So we're going to turn off the third-person camera, turn on the first-person camera. And then we're going to grab our is first-person variable. I'm going to hold down Alt when I drag that out so I can set it. And we're going to set that to true. There we go. That's the end of this function. So let's go ahead and copy all of that code we just created. We can go over to third-person camera active. Paste this in. Set it up. So for the third person, we do not want to use rotation yaw. And we are not going to be in first person. And then what we can do is switch these two values here. Now, personally, I like to turn off one camera before turning on the other, just so I don't get any odd screen glitches or anything. So I'm just going to switch these two variables. And I held down Alt when I clicked on that pin to disconnect it. So if I hold Alt, click there, it will disconnect any active pin. So I'm going to go ahead and hook these back up. So now in our third-person camera active function, we're not going to use yaw. We're going to turn off the first-person camera and then instantly turn on the third-person camera, and then set our is first-person view variable to false. Let's go ahead and compile and save. So at the top, we can close both of these functions for now. Go back to our event graph. I'm going to come down here, and just for testing right now, I'm going to look for keyboard V. You can use whatever keyboard you want, or if you wish to pause the video and go set up the enhanced input system with your own interaction for this, you can do that. For right now, I'm just going to use V. So when I press V, I'm going to want to ask it, is this first person? I'm going to hold down my left mouse button and press B to add a branch, shortcut for that. So if this is first person, then we want to switch and go to third person. We will grab our third person camera active function. Under false, we will want to grab our first person camera active function. Let's go ahead and compile and save. Go back to our game. We'll test this out. So here we're in third person, and there's our first person. As you can see, it is attached directly to the character, so it automatically comes with whatever head bob that your animation has and anything else. Obviously, that is way too rough for what we want. Let's go fix that. Come back into your character blueprint. We're going to click on the first person camera. Over on the right-hand side, underneath the camera options, there's a use pawn control rotation. We're going to go ahead and check that. Compile, save. Then if we go back and test our game again and hit play, you still get some movement, but not nearly as bad as it was. So I'm going to stop playing. So really, if you just want a quick way to switch between first person and third person, and you don't care about the abrupt change in the camera, if that fits your game, then at that point we're done. For my game, I wanted to be able to add a smooth transition between the first and third person character. So let's go ahead and get started on that now. It's a little trickier than you think, but we'll break it down step by step. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to the start play. And I'm going to go ahead and move this up because we're going to add a few things into here. Make this bigger, so I got plenty of space to work with. I'm going to grab this content. I'm going to move this down. And this is personal preference. You could add your logic after this pin if you want to. I prefer to come in and make this bigger and add a sequence node and just kind of keep my code separate from what came with the class by default. Pull from event begin play, look for sequence. Go ahead and make sure that execution is still hooked up. Over here in variables, I'm going to add two new ones. This one I'm going to call FP for first person camera location. And I'm going to make this of type transform. So a transform variable will have your position, your rotation, and your scale all together. You could track them separately if you wanted to. I'm just going to go ahead and pull them together into one variable right now at the start, and I'll separate them as we need them later on in the code. So we're going to add a second one. We're going to name this TP for third person camera location. Since we're going to be transitioning these cameras from one to the other for that smooth effect, third to first, and then first back to third, we want to track where they are at the beginning of the game so we can always put them back in their needed positions. So I'm going to hold down Alt and grab first person camera. I'm going to drop this here. Then I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing with third. I'm going to go ahead and hook those up. And then from the second pin on the sequence node, go ahead and hook that up. And then we're going to get a reference to our first person camera. We're going to drag that out. I'm going to get the relative transformation because they are children of the spring arms and other components within our character. So I don't necessarily want the world location. I want to know where they are relative to the mesh. So same thing with the third person camera. Get that transform and hook that up. And there we go. We have preserved the starting locations of both of our cameras at the beginning of the game. So I'm going to organize these. I'm going to go ahead and make a comment on these and call it save camera starting position. For this comment, I'm going to come over. I'm going to set a custom color on this. And if you guys do this to separate your code away from code that came with your project, you can do this and then grab, if you want to use the same color a lot, you can grab this new color once you have it set, and you can drag it up here to this box and it will preserve that color for you. All right, there we go. Now for my character, I wanted the option to start my character in either first or third person mode, just depending upon what my user was doing and what they saved at the time. I'm going to come down here, add a new one. I'm going to call this start third person, question mark. I want this to be of type bool. I'm going to compile and save, and by default, I'm going to make that true. Then I can come up here, get another pin. And honestly, we can come down to our testing code, copy this. Honestly, we just need these three. Copy, go back up to start. And paste these right down here. I'm going to drag out my start third person variable that we just created. I'm going to add that. Then we will add, we want to take this additional pin we added to sequence and hook it up there. Move that over. We can add another comment here. I like that. Press C. Call this set camera start view. Reach over here to color. I'm going to click my previously saved color. I'm going to go ahead and compile and save. So this is what we added on this. If you come to this variable right now, you will see it's true. And if we start our game, we'll see we start in third person. Everything still works like we wanted it to. But if for some reason, if my user through their save game was using first person, or I just wanted to start a level at first person, if I uncheck that, save it and hit play, you will see that we start in the first person view and we can still switch back. So just a matter of preference you can set at design or load time. I'm going to come back down here to our test keys. Now for the camera transition. This part can seem a little complicated, but let's break it down step by step. To prevent the user from just spamming on the key to switch between first and third person, I want to add another variable and call it is camera transitioning. Some users may prefer the quick transition, others may like the glide in and out. So I'm going to add one more variable, and I'm going to call this allow smooth transition. I'm going to compile and save, and by default, I'm going to turn that on for us. So I'm going to hold down Alt, and I'm going to break this execution pin right here. I'm going to take this code, I'm going to move it to the side just for a moment, and we're still going to need that. But as soon as the player hits their key to switch the cameras, first thing I want to do is ask it, is the camera already transitioning between one or the other? If so, we don't want to break that routine until it's done. This is just going to provide a smoother experience for your user. And on this one, let's do a not Boolean, just so we can keep our pins in some logical order, and you'll see what I mean here in a minute. So if the camera is not transitioning, first thing we want to do is hold down Alt and grab is camera transitioning and set that to true, since we're going to begin our camera movements. Then we want to ask it if we want to allow a smooth transition. I'm going to pull that out there. I'm going to add another branch. So for this, if they do not want a smooth transition, we can just take the false pin and hook that up to the code we had before. But if we do, let's take this same branch right here, if it's in first person or not. And we can set up the transitions. So if we do want the smooth transition and it is in first person, then let's come up here and let's add a timeline. So for this timeline, I'm going to name it first person, third person timeline. I'm going to go ahead and double click that and open that up. I'm going to add a float track. I'm going to name it slide amount. For the length, I'm only going to make it about half a second. I'm going to add 2 pins. First one is going to be 0 and 0. And the second one is going to be 0.5, the same length as the transition, with a full value of 1. Now up to you if you want to leave this line straight. If not, you can highlight both your pins, right-click on the pin, and there's a couple different options in here to allow a little bit smoother transition to that line. For now, I'm going to leave this linear just so we can see what it's like. I'm going to go ahead and compile and save. I'm going to close this timeline. To build this out, we want to go from the first person camera to the third person camera for this transition. Since we're wanting to translate them and they are children of other objects, we want to get the world location, world transform of each of these. I'm going to go ahead and get the second one now. Straighten those up. So from our timeline, we're going to take this slide amount that we created. We're going to pull from here, and we're going to look for a lerp transform. And then we're going to hook up first person camera to A, because we want to go from that position to the position of the third person camera. So we'll hook that one up to B. I'm going to straighten up these nodes a little bit. Then since we want the first person camera to slide back to the third person camera, I'm going to go ahead and grab the first person camera again. You can pull from this node for a reference, but your code could look a little convoluted. So from here, from the first person camera, I'm going to set world transform. And for the new transform, I'm going to take the output from lerp. Go ahead and move this down. And what we want to do is we want to take this update pin from our timeline, and for each value, come and set the world transition. That's going to allow for a smooth kind of transition between the two. Then when we're done, we want to pull from finished. I'm just going to move this up here a little bit. Then we want to activate the third person camera. So I'm going to call the function we created just a little bit ago. Then since we just moved the first person camera back to where the third person camera is, we want to grab the first person camera again. This time we want to set the relative transform. And you want this one here, not the one with message. I'm going to hook that up. So after the timeline is finished and sets our third person camera with the first person camera off, we're going to grab the first person camera location variable that we saved at the begin play. We're going to get that and hook that up to transform. So it will reset the first person camera back to where it needs to be on our character. So for the next transition, it's in the correct place. Now, I know that seemed like a lot. Let's review it right quick. So we're going to come in and press our key. If the camera is not transitioning, we want to set it to transition if we're going to allow a smooth transition. If we're not, we're going to come down here and just switch the camera. But if it is a first person, we're going to come up here to this timeline. We're going to find the world transforms of both the first and third person cameras, lerp between those two over the course of this timeline. Then when that's done, we're going to activate the third person camera, deactivate the first person camera, and then reset the first person camera's relative transform. This will set it back to its starting location on its spring arm. To test this out right now, let's click on our variable start third person. Leave that unchecked. Make sure it's unchecked. Compile and save. We'll come in and play our game. We should start in the first person view. If we hit whatever key you set up for the transition, mine is V, you'll see it slides back to the third person camera. So there we go. It's a nice start. So for this, you would think you could just copy this code and rearrange the cameras and get that to work the other way, but it won't. For a test, I'm going to go ahead and hook that up right quick and show you why. So false, I'm going to do this. So give me just a moment to change these around. For this transition from third person to first person, I just switched a couple of these variables around. So on the timeline, we want to go from third person to first person. We'll do the same lerp and smoothly transition those cameras. And then we will switch the active, shut off third, turn on first, and then return the third person camera to its starting location. Now, the one last thing we need to do is reset the transitioning variable. If you wanted, you could hold down Alt and drag that out and hook this up at the end of each of these locations. What I want to do when I have just one node left like that, I will make some additional space. I will grab is camera transitioning and we'll set it right here. Leave that false, and then I will hook up every one of my finish executions. Now remember, this one is running from update. We want this one since it's hooked to finish. We need to remember to hook up these two in case the user doesn't want to use a smooth camera transition. So now every one of our finish nodes are hooked to here, and it'll turn off is camera transitioning, which will allow this code to run again. So let's compile and save and test. And we start in first person. We go to third, nice smooth transition. We go back to first. We get that little bit of camera jerk. And that comes from the fact that the character body rotation needs to be set according to the mouse. And it's not when it's in third person. But if we notice now that we're in multiple transitions, we're no longer smoothly moving back and forth from between the characters' cameras. We're simply snapping. Let's go back to our code. If we take the branch for our smooth transitions and move that to play to start, or play from start, excuse me, compile and save. And we're going to come back and we're going to see this issue with the third to first be even more pronounced. So let me show that to you now. Once again, first to third, not bad. But if we see the camera translates to the first person rotation, which is set according to the mesh on the first person camera, and then it's snapping to where the mouse was pointing. So obviously this is not a good experience. So what we need to do for the second transition is we need to come back down to our code from the third to the first person camera, and we're going to handle this translation a little bit differently. So let's delete the lerp transform. I'm going to move these over and make a little bit of room. I'm going to separate these two. From the slide amount, we're going to look for what's called a lerp vector right here on top. And we still want to lerp from one camera position to the other, but you'll notice that this variable is the full transform, which is the location, rotation, and scale. This lerp vector is only worried about the location. So let's right click on this and split the pin strut. We'll do this for both of them. Move these back just a little bit more. So we only want to take the location from the third person and then lerp that to the first person. But then at the same time, what we want to do is come back to slide amount. We're going to pull a second execution line from that, and we want to look for what's called a lerp rotator. I'm going to hook that up. So from here, we want to come back on the left side and get our capsule component. Remember, a character is basically the capsule component with its cameras, the mesh, the movement component, and everything else as children underneath of that. So if I rotate one, it's going to rotate the rest. So I'm going to pull out the capsule component. And from here, I'm only worried about the rotation, so I want to get world rotation. Spelled correctly. With this, I want to lerp the capsule's rotation to the third person camera's rotation. So the capsule will be hooked up to A, the third person camera's rotation will be hooked up to B. We're going to come over here, we're going to keep the third person camera reference. We do not want to do the set world transform. In this case, we want to simply set the world location. We're going to hook that up to the update pin. We're going to take the return value from the lerp vector over to here. The reason I changed this from set world transform to set world location is we're only moving the location. If I had this before, let me grab that again for you. Let's grab set world transform. If I pulled from lerp vector right now, since the vector is only worried about the location, I could drag this into here, and what you're going to find is Unreal will make this translation for you. But if I delete that, and if I right click and split this pin structure, you're going to see location, rotation, and scale. If we take this and hook up just the location and only lerp the location, it will reset the rotation and scale back to these default values. So rotation will be 0, 0, and scale will be 1. So for what we're doing, scale is not a problem, but this rotation is. So that's why we are not using the set world transform. Go ahead and delete that out. I just explained that to you guys right quick. From the capsule component, I'm just going to pull from that one. And I want to set the world rotation, since we're only worried about the rotation on this one. And I want to update this along the timeline. So from this update to the set world location, I'm then going to set world rotation. And then I will hook up the lerp rotation from here. That way we are still lerping from the third person camera location to the first person camera location, but then we're also lerping the character capsule to the correct rotation when it goes in. And then after that, just as we did before, we will activate the first person camera and then set the third person back. And from there, we'll say the camera is no longer transitioning. So that was a lot. Let's go ahead and compile and save. I'll test our game. So first person, third person, all of that still looks good. But this time, if we rotate our camera and go in, we'll notice we don't get that jerky motion like we did before with the incorrect rotations. Now, as we zoom from third person into first person, our character capsule just rotates for us. And if you look close, you can see it perform that rotation just for a split second. So there we go. As a bonus, let's go ahead and set in a parameter so we can control this transition speed on the camera. Stop play, come back to the blueprint. Let's go ahead and comment this up for a moment. There's a lot going on here. Let's keep this pretty clean. Your future self will thank you. Name this third to first person. Fix my spelling mistake there right quick. This is our first to third person. Make that blue. Comment this one for camera switch no smoothing. Then what we can do is I'm going to go ahead and slide this jump up here for a moment so I can highlight all of this. We can try to condense this a little bit. Then I'm going to highlight everything, and you can layer your comments on this. I'll call that camera switching, and then we'll just make that a bit of a gray color. We can also make that blue if we wanted to, but we'll go with gray for right now. With that commented up, let's go ahead and add in a variable to change our timeline speed. So if we remember, we named this timeline the first person to third person timeline. Since we copied and pasted, this defaulted to the regular name. So I'm going to hit F2 and call this third person to first person timeline. And these names are important to remember as we will be referencing them in just a moment. I'm going to come back up here to begin play and pull that up so we can add some more room at the bottom. Move those in a little bit. So if we right click down here and we search, we can get a reference to both of our timelines. Zoom in so we can see that a little better. Let's create a variable on the side over here. I'm going to call this camera transition speed. And that's going to be of type float. From one of the timelines here, I'm going to go ahead and drag that out, and I'm going to set play rate on this. Then I'm going to go ahead and drag the other camera's reference into the target, so both of them are set by this. I'm going to drag out the camera transition speed and hook that up to the new rate on there. Compile and save, and I want to remember to set a default value of 1 on that. 0 would not allow the timeline to play. I'm going to come up here, add another pin to our sequence. I'll go ahead and hook that up right there, and then I will add another connection pin to smooth that out a little bit. Let's comment this also. Set camera transition speed. For me, I'm putting this on begin play. So whatever I set this camera transition speed to will be set at the beginning of the game, and that's it. If you wanted to perform this code at the same time of the camera switching, so you could real time or maybe from an options menu change that variable as the game progresses, that's up to you and where you want to place that logic. For me, for this demo, in the begin play is good enough. Since we're here, let's take a moment to talk about categories on variables. It's a good way to kind of organize this variable list for you. You can kind of see right here, the cameras and the components already kind of have these on here. But what about the ones we've created? Some of these we just use for logic. Some of these we have for our configuration convenience. So let's go ahead and take this one, start third person. Over here on category, if you hit this drop down, you're just going to see default, camera, and character. And those are the three that come with any project in Unreal. But a few people know you can actually just type in this. I'm just going to call it configuration. And now that I've done that, let's come down to allow smooth transition. I'm going to hit the drop down, and now configuration is in this list. And if you look on the left-hand side, we now have this configuration category, and whatever variables we choose to go in there can. So let's also grab camera transition speed. And I believe the rest of these are just fine where they are since they are considered internal logic. But for this one, probably not a big deal right now because we have just a very small handful of variables. But as you get more and more in some of your code, this is a great way to kind of sanity check yourself and keep yourself organized. So let's compile and save. We'll go out and we'll test everything. So everything works still. I'm going to stop. I'm going to go back to the character blueprint. So let's go ahead and make that 2.5 times faster. Compile and save. So now we notice our camera is really fast. So while it's not quite as quick as the initial rough transition or without smoothing, it's still pretty quick. You can also go the other direction. And let's make this 0.5. Now remember, our timeline is set to half a second, so this is half of that value. So let's compile and save. And we'll notice the camera's a lot slower and smoother this time. Personal preference on what you want to set for your game. There we go, crew. We've set up a quick and easy camera system that allows you to smoothly transfer between first person full body and third person with different types of camera controls for each. We've also set this up so during design time or through our options menu, we can decide to start in first or third person. We can decide if we want to allow smoothing or not, and then how fast we want that transition to be. If you found this content helpful, please like and subscribe to the channel because it helps me grow. If there's a particular topic you would like me to cover, please leave a comment down below. Until then, check out the videos I'm going to link for you. Thanks again for stopping by. I look forward to making games with you.